It is March 1943. As we have seen, by this point it was clear that the tide had turned in favour of the Allies, with their hard-earned victories at Midway, Guadalcanal and the Cockadut Track, showing that the initiative was now firmly in their hands. Yet the Pacific War was far from over, and so was the New Guinea campaign. A few weeks ago we covered the Battle of Wau, a bold Japanese advance by the Okabe detachment that had caught the Australian forces off guard and that had been defeated only at the 11th hour. Emboldened by that near success, the Japanese again gambled that it was possible for them to retake the initiative in New Guinea, yet their efforts would only lead to certain doom, finally cementing for the first time in the war that the Japanese offensive capabilities had been destroyed, and that their role from now on was going to be defensive. Join us as we delve into another key point of the Pacific War, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. Hey history fans! As you know, the YouTube algorithm precludes us from releasing more than 3 or 4 videos per week. As the more releases, the lower the average views is, which hurts the overall standing of the channel in the search rankings and such. Still, we produce more videos than that and want to give our viewers a chance to watch them. Videos are now published as YouTube member and Patreon exclusives. For just $5 a month, yes, 1 cup of coffee, you'll get access to almost 20 new videos. We released the series on the Peloponnesian Wars and the Italian Unification Wars. Click the link in the description or pinned comment, and you will get exclusive videos, early access to all videos, learn our schedule, get access to our private Discord, watch our behind-the-scenes videos, and much more. Thank you for watching and your kind support. We wouldn't be able to do what we love without you. As we last saw, the forces under Brigadier Motten had successfully arrived in the nick of time to defend Wau and hold off the Japanese surprise attack, thus forcing the Okabe detachment to fight a difficult withdrawal back to their main base at Mubo. With the Australians in hot pursuit and harassing them all the way, General Okabe's forces would finally arrive at Mubo by the end of February, signifying the end of the Battle of Wau. Yet by late February, the Japanese still held the vital high ground around Waipali and Guadalcanal, something that indicated that a renewed offensive against Wau was still possible. But more importantly, Okabe would need to receive substantial reinforcements to stand a chance against the full might of Motten's 17th Brigade. Because of this, Generals Imamura and Adachi immediately started to plan for another convoy to be sent from Rabaul to Leh by the end of February, hoping to reinforce the area with the rest of Lieutenant General Nakano Hidemitsu's 51st Division. The convoy of 8 transports would be escorted by a small fleet of 8 destroyers under Rear Admiral Kimura Matsutomi, and although this was a small fleet, these destroyers and their experienced crews had taken part in some of the most important naval battles of the Pacific War up to this point. Additionally, by the end of February, the Japanese had also carried out a large number of convoy operations that consisted of only 1 or 2 destroyers, successfully reinforcing their presence on the Wewak-Madang coast with the bulk of the 20th and 41st Divisions. Learning from the past experience of the January convoy, this time Kimura was to follow a route along the northern coast, trying to put more distance between the Japanese vessels and the Allied reconnaissance aircraft until the convoy reached the Vitiaz and Dampier Straits. Kimura would command the operation from the destroyer Shirayuki, while other destroyers would also carry important figures, such as Generals Adachi and Nakano. Upon arriving at Leh, the ships would anchor 600 meters apart along the shoreline from just west of the airfield to the mouth of the Busu River, around 500 meters offshore. It was also planned to establish smoke screens over the anchorage to mask both the unloading vessels and the shore storage areas if any air attacks occurred. Furthermore, an escort of 40 naval and 6 army aircraft would provide aerial protection over the convoy for 13 hours each day. Meanwhile, General Mackay, who had temporarily taken command of New Guinea force while General Herring was on leave, recognized that the enemy still hoped to capture Wau and the Bulalo Valley, and that his forces in the area were insufficient to carry out the defense of these places. By early February, Allied intelligence reports had also concluded that although further troop movements to Leh could be expected, the Japanese were likely to have found surface convoys too costly for normal running. Thus, they were using submarines to bring supplies to Leh, and they were setting up an alternative supply line via Madang Wewak. Persistent reports of Japanese patrols moving down the Ramu and Wampit valleys, with Wau as their objective, finally forced General Blamey to prepare the 3rd Australian Division, mainly consisting of the 7th and 15th Brigades, to reinforce the Bulalo Valley area. Yet these forces would not be ready until late March, so in the meantime, only the depleted 39th Battalion would be flown to Wau to provide a reserve for an anticipated Japanese attack. On February 19th, however, reports of large concentrations of ships in Rabaul and a decrypted message indicated that there would be a second convoy to Leh in early March. This vital lead allowed Generals Blamey and MacArthur to organise an appropriate response, immediately appointing General Kenny, the commander of the Allied air forces, to deal with this new threat. Kenny's command comprised the Royal Australian Air Force under Air Vice Marshal William Bostock and the 5th Air Force, led by Brigadier General Ennis Whitehead, totaling some 154 fighters, 34 light bombers, 41 medium bombers, and 39 heavy bombers available for combat in New Guinea. The 5th Air Force was also subdivided into 2 main commands: the V Fighter Command of Brigadier General Paul Wordsmith, which counted with some 95 fighters available for combat, including a number of competent P-38 Lightnings, and the V Bomber Command of Brigadier General Howard Ramey, which counted with a variety of medium and heavy bombers. But most importantly, Kenny and Whitehead had at their disposal the 3rd Attack Group of light bombers, nicknamed the Grim Reapers, which included a squadron of A-20 Bostons and 2 squadrons of B-25 Mitchells that had been significantly modified by Major Paul Pappy Gunn. These modifications, for example, allowed the B-25s to be used for masthead bombing attacks without a bombardier, in opposition to their original role of carrying out bombardier-assisted missions from altitude. The Australians also counted with the No. 9 Group of Group Captain William Garring, consisting of the No. 73 Wing at Port Moresby and the No. 71 Wing at Milner Bay. Garring had noted how poor were the Allied attempts to prevent a number of Rabaul convoys from reaching the New Guinea mainland, and was determined to put in place a suitable plan for the next convoy to try, so he would persuade Whitehead that a properly rehearsed plan, integrating all available aircraft and carrying out skip bombing and masthead bombing, was needed for the operation. Garring's plan was for the planes to gather over Cape Ward Hunt at 0930, and then be over the convoy at 10 in quick succession, totally overwhelming the enemy escorting aircraft and the anti-aircraft defences. At least 2 rehearsals would be carried out, with the last one turning out to be damn good. At last, on February 28th, the Japanese finished loading all their supplies, with the convoy departing Rabaul for Leh at around 0200 on March 1st. Slowly moving across the Bismarck Sea, the convoy would enjoy 2 tropical storms that hampered the Allied air reconnaissance for the first few days. Then, on March 1st, as the weather was clearing, 3 B-24s would make the first convoy sighting, reporting 14 vessels escorted by 0 fighters around 70 kilometers northwest of Abili and heading west. Yet the Allies needed more information, so more aircraft would be dispatched to continue the search. Despite this, General Whitehead would command a formation of 8 B-17s that were returning from a striking mission at Gasmata to attack the convoy, although the bombers would fail to locate the vessels after dropping around a dozen flares on the water. Meanwhile, the Japanese destroyer Tokitsukaze had intercepted an Allied message saying that the convoy had been spotted, so Kimura and his forces were alert that an attack was incoming. Undisturbed, the convoy would nonetheless steam west along the New Britain coast under the protective blanket of weather for a further 6 hours. At dawn on March 2nd, under cloudy weather with occasional showers, 6 Australian A-20s also swept low over Leh to bomb the runway and strafe some dispersal areas, successfully preventing the enemy fighter escorts from using this base. At about 10 o'clock, another Liberator flying through poor weather managed to find the convoy yet again, so General Whitehead decided to launch his first strike. Although the convoy was still too far away for a coordinated attack, 8 B-17s took off to attack. followed an hour later by a second group of 20 heavy bombers. They were to be escorted by 12 P-38s, equipped with long-range drop tanks, yet the cloud cover would hinder them and make them miss the rendezvous. Finding the enemy ships without difficulty, the first 8 B-17s made the first attack amidst a rain of anti-aircraft fire at around 09:45, claiming to have scored 5 critical bomb hits on the Kyokusei Maru that started large fires. The second formation then struck under broken cloud and rain squalls, this time escorted by the P-38s, claiming to have sunk 4 enemy vessels. Yet in truth, only 2 transports would be hit, suffering only very light damage. The Kyokusei Maru, however, had to be abandoned and would finally sink sometime later. Despite this, destroyers Asagumo and Yukukaze would manage to rescue 850 troops of the 1,200 on board, as well as 2 mountain guns before the transport sunk. They would then race ahead of the convoy at full speed to land at Leh with the rescued troops, along with General Nakano, by the end of the day, immediately turning around to rejoin the convoy before daybreak. A number of airstrikes by heavy bombers would follow throughout the day, yet the convoy was now stretched out for 20 kilometers and zigzagging regularly, so high-level bombing would fail to cause further damage, as it was inefficient in this situation. Worthy of mention is that the numerous Japanese escorting fighters showed little aggressive intent against the American bombers, and then suddenly departed after the last attack of the day. By nightfall, Australian PBYs had been sent to shadow the Japanese convoy, successfully determining that it was heading south through the Vitiaz Strait towards Leh. Yet during the early hours of March 3rd, Admiral Kimura made a disastrous decision as he ordered his ships to mark time and circle in the dark, wasting at least 2 precious hours of the cover of night. The reasons behind this catastrophic blunder are largely unknown, but maybe Kimura wanted to be sure that he would have air cover at first light, which would then escort him all the way to his destination. In any case, he would see neither Japanese aircraft nor stormy weather by sunrise. A clear and brilliant day was ahead, a bad omen for the Japanese. At this point, the enemy was also within range of their airbase at Milner, so a strike of 8 Beauforts would be launched at 0400. Only 2 of the Australian torpedo bombers would make it through a heavy weather front, however, and both would fail to cause much damage on the convoy. Nonetheless, the Japanese commanders were now alert of the torpedo danger that those Beauforts posed, something that would be astutely used by the Allied planners in some hours. At 0510, 4 Australian A-20s would again hit Leh, catching several planes on the ground and leaving them unavailable to help protect the convoy. Finally, by 0830, a striking force of 90 aircraft had departed Port Moresby to rendezvous over Cape Ward Hunt an hour later. Upon adopting the correct formation, they would then proceed towards the objective, reaching the convoy around 10. The leading 13 B-17s, covered by around 30 Lightnings that immediately engaged the recently arrived Zeros, were the first to dive in, attracting the enemy anti-aircraft fire, while the experienced Beaufighters came in just above the waves, trying to pose as Beaufort torpedo bombers. Although the bombing of the B-17s would be largely inefficient, the bombers and the Lightnings would manage to take down 7 Zeros and damage another 3, also leaving the Japanese vessels separated and vulnerable to strafers and masthead bombers. Meanwhile, as the Beaufighters menacingly advanced, Admiral Kimura rapidly took the bait and ordered his vessels to turn and face the enemy, presenting the narrowest possible profile for a moving torpedo. This, in turn, exposed the length of the vessels to strafing, which was very much to the advantage of the Beaufighters. The Australian pilots then selected their own objectives and began their strafing runs, firing with their 6 303 machine guns and their devastating 4 20mm Hispano cannons. In combination, each plane let loose a ferocious stream which flayed everything it touched, creating a river of fire and destruction running the length of the ships. Some of the vessels even stopped dead in the water, as the officers in the bridges were rapidly cut down, and the Australians also knocked out many of their anti-aircraft positions. After the first strafing run had finished and the Australians set out to begin their second run, however, the B-17s and B-25s unexpectedly began to drop bombs over the Japanese vessels and over the Beaufighters, so the Australians would have to go in with bombs falling and exploding all around them. The Mitchells of the Grim Reapers, with their modified weapons that made them true commerce destroyers, had the capability of creating even more mayhem at close range than the Beaufighters. Squeezing the firing buttons on their control columns, the Allied pilots watched the deadly mixture tear up the ships like a gigantic claw. The modified A-20s would be the last to join in the struggle, and they would find every ship they tried to attack already spoken for by a number of aircraft coming in from a variety of angles. By 10:15, all 7 transports had been hit and were sinking about 100 kilometers southeast of Finschhafen. Furthermore, with a masterful combination of skip bombing and mast height bombing, some Japanese destroyers would be taken down by the ferocious Grim Reapers. For example, Kimura's flagship, the Shirayuki, after being strafed early on by a Beaufighter that cut down the officers in the bridge, would then suffer 2 bomb hits by a Mitchell that started large fires and caused a huge explosion. As the destroyer sank, the crew would be rescued by the Shikinami, including a wounded Kimura. The destroyer Arashio would also be hit, forcing it to collide with the disabled supply ship Najima and suffering a list of 30 degrees, for which it had to be abandoned. General Adachi's ship, the Takitsukaze, would likewise be hit by the low-level bombers, suffering fatal damage, for which Adachi and the 18th Army staff would have to be evacuated. Both the crews of the Arashio and Takitsukaze would be rescued by the unsinkable Yukikaze, which was not damaged in the entire battle. And the other remaining destroyers would also go on to rescue the crews of the sinking transports, suffering some damage by the attacks of the Allied airmen. After midday, the second series of airstrikes by B-17s and A-20s also began, successfully bombing and strafing the Arashio while she was rescuing survivors. The 4 surviving destroyers then withdrew up the Vitiaz Strait and were joined by the destroyer Hatsuyuki off Long Island. After refueling the destroyers, the Hatsuyuki and the Uranami brought 2,700 survivors back to Rabaul, while the other 3 destroyers continued to pick up survivors, finally bringing a further 1,100 to Kavieng by March 5th. On the night of March 3rd, a force of 10 PT boats also set out to finish off the convoy, and some B-17s and Beaufighters were likewise sent to attack the Japanese survivors and their rescuers, a mission that was largely unpopular amongst the pilots, but that was largely necessary lest they reach Leh and soon join the front lines. It is estimated that these missions resulted in a further 352 Japanese troops being killed, from the total of 2,890 casualties that the Japanese suffered in the battle. Around 224 survivors would also be rescued by submarines on March 6th, and many others would make their way to various islands, where they were captured or killed by the Allied forces. Although General MacArthur laughably estimated 15,000 enemy casualties, describing the battle as the decisive aerial engagement of the Southwest Pacific Theater, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was indeed a major victory for Allied air power, although the Allied land forces would fail to capitalize on this success and launch a swift offensive against Leh before it could be reinforced. It also cemented the fact that the initiative in the Pacific was now firmly in the hands of the Allies. Next week, we'll return to the Solomons and to China to cover some of the new developments that were unfolding in these theaters. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.